Hello and welcome to this edition of Insights and Sounds. Today we have with us Dr. Jill Court. Jill recently received her doctorate from the University of Bristol School of Education. Her doctorate looked into language learning, integration, and ESOL learners' trajectories in Britain. Jill is an associate teacher at the School of Education. Welcome, Jill.
Hi, hello.
So first of all, I'd just like to invite you to introduce your research. If you could just summarize your research and why you're researching into ESOL learning, language proficiency, and refugee learners integration, why that's such an important and under-researched area.
Okay, yeah, sure, thank you. Okay, so as Martin said, my doctoral research involved exploring the views and experiences of adult ESOL learners in Britain. So my professional background is teaching ESOL. So that stands for ESOL stands for English for Speakers of Other Languages. And so I'd be teaching English to migrants and refugees who are living in Britain, settling in Britain and making lives for themselves here. They may be newly arrived, or they may be living in the UK may have been living in the UK for 10 or 20 years. So a wide variety of people, and they're all adults. So the context that I'm researching is not children who are learning English. So the reason why I'm interested in the topic, and I've been researching the topic, is based from my teaching experiences. So the learners that I worked with, they were learning English in this political context, really, which has become increasingly hostile to migrants, with the the hostile environment kind of policies that the government have been implicating. And also over the past couple of decades, so not just the current government but previous governments, there's been a lot of political discourse and associated policy around language and immigration. And this has characterized the acquisition of English as essential to integration. And more than that, the ways in which migrants and refugees use language, so more specifically, whether they learn English or even if they speak English in public, has come to symbolize their, if you like, the ways in which they can demonstrate they're willing to integrate into British life. So English language has become associated with being a good citizen, if you like, and doing what a migrant and refugee should do. And related to that, there's been a lot of emphasis and scrutiny on migrants and refugees' social and cultural practices, as well as their linguistic practices. But in this context, the experiences of my language learners, actually, they faced many challenges to learning English, including childcare and other family commitments, work commitments, immigration status, and lack of adequate ESOL provision. Also, it was evident to me that they faced many barriers to making good lives for themselves, not just English. English is important for sure, but they faced many other challenges. So it was this mismatch really between the discourse and policy and the experiences of the ESOL learners that I work with, which basically sparked my interest in this research. And I wanted to, I really wanted to get their perspectives on these matters, on what was important for them, really.
Okay, interesting. So that brings us nicely on to methodology, which I wanted to talk to you about, because you brought a particular approach to this research, which I think was unique in some ways. So what was particular, if you could share that with the viewers, what was particular about your methodology and theoretical approach which you brought, and how did that enable you to make these understandings and to understand about English and the proficiency and its meaning for integration?
Okay, sure, right. So my methodological approach, so I combined what I called longitudinal timeline interviews with ESOL learner participants. And I combined that with quantitative questionnaires with a much larger sample. I'll expand on the methodology in a moment, but I think it'll help if I outline the theoretical approach first. So my main conceptual lens, I drew on sociolinguistics, in particular the work of Bonnie Norton, who she did a lot of work, or she has done a lot of work in the past sort of over 20 years on identity and second language learning. And so in a nutshell, by using the lens of identity, she uses it to understand how migrant social context and the power relations in the social context can impact on their language learning experiences. So that is a very useful framework to look at the experiences of migrants and refugees learning English in Britain. And then I combine that with, well, I needed to articulate integration, because obviously there's what we hear about in the political discourses, but I needed a model which would help me examine this. So I drew mostly on the work of Sarah Spencer and our own Catherine Charlesy on their model of integration, and also on Ager and Strang's indicators of refugee integration. But I adapted these ideas in order to focus on language proficiency and identity and how they work with integration. But also what was important to me was a focus on what I call the affective factors. So this is issues around feelings of safety and stability, feelings of well-being and confidence, which I feel are under-examined in scholarship on integration, or well, in this context that I'm looking at anyway, and also absence from the political policies and discourses around integration. So with the methodology then, so the interviews, I wanted to get first-hand accounts from ESOL learners about their experiences over time. So that's why I did some repeated interviews over an academic year. So I interviewed many of the participants 3 times and got them to draw timelines of their experiences since arriving in Britain. And we used that to reflect on their experiences and looking at processes of change over time. And then I combined that with the questionnaire where I surveyed 409 ESOL participants from Britain. And that was to embed the in-depth interview data with larger scale data in order to provide context and backdrop with the first-hand accounts. And also I hoped that it would enable me to speak more strongly to policy and to public debates on integration.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I mean, that's, yeah, as you say, that's a really strong methodology. And I was going to ask you about the different scales that you are working at. I think you've alluded to that a little bit. I'd like to move on to maybe talking about some of your findings in a moment, unless you had anything else to add to that. It sounds like it was important for you that you looked at different scales, and you said that you drew on some others like Catherine Chowsley and Norton. I guess in that that wider framing of discourse, and maybe what Bourdieu would call doxa. I guess that setting is important to your research.
Yes. So I'm very interested in the ways in which language is discussed in in the discourses. And as I mentioned earlier, since like in the last 20 years, so the Blair government had several moments, as well as this government, when they decided that they needed to reinforce language, ways of testing migrants' language in order to preclude or some people from coming to Britain, and reduce the amount of, in order to control immigration. So language has become a tool to control immigration, and the discourses around that, I think, have affected the way we see or have affected public kind of perspectives around migrants' use of language. So yes, you're right. Discourses are really important in the framing of the study.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, that's like you said, it's a very political hot tool. I think David Cameron, wasn't it? Famously said that everybody has to learn English if they're coming to this country when he was Prime Minister, and then at the same time withdrew funding for asylum seekers at the same time.
Yes, and I mean, this is a constant trope, actually, is that so Boris Johnson said in his leadership campaign that people must learn English, and I think he said so when in Rome we must speak English, or something like that. But it's just this constant common sense idea that people must speak English and that any other language is not useful or valued in Britain.
Okay, thanks very much. It's really important research. Well, thanks very much for joining us, Dr. Court, and I wish you all the best for your next steps.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.